First of all, thank you again for staying throughout the day to hear us exchange the ideas. And now it's my turn to present, so I'm still figuring out how to start, but let me actually move to my presentation, I think. That would be the best way to start. So I'll let our guys in the back fix that. But let me tell you, I told you a little bit what happened to me with the volcano, but let me tell you a little bit of where I come from as well, because I didn't always work for Microsoft. It's only been for the past 5 years. I used to be a government official. So I used to face a lot of the challenges that we are discussing here. So for about 5 years, I was chief of staff of the finance minister of Mexico during the administration of President Vicente Fox. If you remember, he had a relatively good friendship with President Lula. And at the time, he was the candidate of democracy. He had just defeated a party that had been in power for 77 years, longer than the Communist Party in Russia, which is kind of hard to believe that that would happen in Mexico. But that was the administration. So when we moved into the administration, there was a lot of eagerness to have openness and transparency. And one of the biggest things that happened was we decided IT policy falls in the finance minister's domain. I don't know why or when that happened, but it does. So everything that has to be done with IT policy is basically regulated and invested and developed by the finance ministry, because I think they think that taxes are a good platform to build the technical platform. But one of the first things that we started was putting the procurement process of the Mexican government online. And we had something called Towelgate, because it turns out that we were publishing all the information of the procurement of buying everything from toilet seats to highway contracts in online on something called Compranet. And suddenly people liked it. It was a great achievement. And then one day the news say, the president's house is buying $4,000 towels. How can you buy $4,000 towels? So that was my first experience with transparency and how it can have a very big impact. Several people had to resign. There was a lot of audits done in the way that, is the information you're publishing accurate or is it exaggerated? So transparency is not only about publishing information, but also about the quality of information. And that was my first experience, but just a small anecdote. So the other thing that I've been doing for the past 2 years has been running or leading this type of effort. What we have here today in Brazil, Gov2.0 is something we call GovCamps around the world. And we've done about 10 of them directly. There's other ones that have been done by independent people. But I will share some of the experiences. You will also hear from Zach Tumin later, from Harvard, who has been working with us as well in almost all of them, I think, except Russia was the only one he missed. That's because he doesn't like Russians, but he's here today. So the first thing is that we hear a lot of conversation about how things have to change. And I do think that Gov2.0 or OpenGov is a concept of change, but there is more than that. Technology is just the medium. I think there is one more layer that we always forget, which is the individual and the organization. And this was the first GovCamp that I've been to, where I heard one of the participants saying the structures of government, the way they were created, are not adequate for what technology is able to do now. So the speed of information and the quality of information has a different effect on organizations that didn't used to happen before. I'll give you another example. When I was trying to get here, I was at the airport, and believe me, I'm a very persistent person, and I was asking the information booth, the airlines, and nobody could give me information. And then I was like, I should just go into Twitter. And that's where I started to find out what was happening with the 2 airports. If you know, there are 2 airports in Buenos Aires. I was in Ezeiza, which is the one that's very far. And there were no flights there, but it turns out that there were flights coming out of the other airport, which is closer to the city. And LAN, turns out, had new services from the city to international, to Sao Paulo, which didn't used to happen 2 years ago. It was only a domestic airport. So through Twitter, people were saying, flights are starting to leave. And that's how I was able to get a ticket at 5 in the morning to be able to come here. I had already kind of given up last night. And then I actually called my travel agent and said, find me a flight, and he couldn't, and he was only searching the Ezeiza airport. And I said, no, I just found out through Twitter that there is this other airport that offers the service. And that's how I was able to find out that nobody in the airport of Ezeiza, the big airport, was able to say, you should go to the other airport, to Aeroparque Newberry. So technology, again, kind of saved my ass there. But it's all about changing the way we think. And that's a lot of what I saw, I heard today. And a lot of this change is being brought by a lot of trends and priorities that we've seen in government. And I think some of these will resonate with you from what we heard today. I mean, even though I didn't understand everything that was said, I think some of that can be interpreted from this graph as well, or matched to this graph. But a lot of the pressure on the openness, transparency is around the economic crisis. I mean, if you remember, the US government released about $1 trillion in economic stimulus. $1 trillion. That's an amazing amount of money just to save the banks. And people wanted to know what was going on, so there was a pressure from the American citizen to understand what was going on, and that's where several organizations like recovery.org, the Foundation for Change, were trying to keep track through technology. And then you had the rise of data.gov and several other sites. So economic crisis was a big trend that helped open government. Then environmental is another trend that we keep seeing. If you know, the Clinton Foundation is very involved with that. There's the C40 Cities Forum that is using technology, so emissions tracker. I'll give you a brief example called Eye on Earth that we're using in the European Union. And then citizen interaction. Every time, I mean, just look at what has happened in the Middle East. There is a bigger pressure from governments to interact with citizens because they don't want to have the extreme, which is what happened or what's happening in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. But there is a dissatisfaction overall with citizens, or skepticism around government, a disenchantment. I'm not heard. The government doesn't care what I think. I can only vote, and maybe that doesn't have an effect. But people are starting to see that their voice through cyberspace changes, and it can affect. And I will also give you a small example on that. And then the consumerization of IT. I mean, I see here all sorts of devices, cameras, iPods, iPads, iPhones, Windows phones. I mean, people are bringing their personal life to work, and that's also becoming an increasing trend. And of course, the advent of consumer technologies, Facebook, Twitter, leveraged to the government context, and that's what I think is the definition of Gov 2.0. Web 2.0 tools adapted to the government context. And the priorities, right? I mean, we heard a lot about modernizing public administration from our panelists when I was able to moderate that panel, where they say that there's 41 processes. So if you want to consolidate services, that's how you modernize public administration. Open government, right? I mean, the need for transparency, for more interaction. I see that all over the world, as well as citizen interaction. And then the cloud, right? Everybody talks about the cloud, but there are very different definitions. I mean, as the one we heard from Apple 2 days ago, that's one definition, and then the one that Google has and the one we have. So the cloud, in the end, the bottom line, no matter how you define it, is about economies of scale, efficiencies, and I think everybody's trying to go in that direction. It's about saving money for our customers. So this paper was just released yesterday in Vienna by the World Economic Forum, and I had access to the draft because the president on the Council on the Future of Government is a good friend of mine. Her name is Jane Fountain. She's from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she works for the World Economic Forum. She actually let me use this quote to share with you today. And this is what they're going with. Basically, governments have opportunities to strongly enhance transparency, collaboration, participation, efficiency, problem-solving capacity, and service delivery to citizens. Social media allow citizens to have a voice as never before and to become producers as well as consumers of information and knowledge. Here is the key thing. First of all, the pillars: collaboration, participation, and transparency. But the one that for me is very interesting is that we are no longer just consumers, but producers of information and knowledge. That didn't exist before. And I think that's a big one. So just a starting thought on this. Now, this is another key thing that if you want some empirical data that I wanted to share with you, and this comes from Edelman. So if you were to hear about a product or information, who would you trust the most based on these categories? And if you can see, government official and regulator is actually at the bottom of the pile, even though we have this divided by North America, Latin America, the European Union, and Asia. Here in Latin America, it's quite low. It's the second lowest after North America. And then who would you trust the most? And apparently here in Latin America, it's a person like yourself. So that is a lot of the secret of the 2.0 world, of the social media world, in that when you hear your fellow citizen maybe supporting a cause, supporting an idea or a public policy, and why he's doing it, it might have more repercussion than if you only hear it from a politician. So if politicians are able to engage citizens better and drive their public policy agenda through crowdsourcing or mass collaboration, then the ideas can gain more strength rather than top to bottom. It actually becomes more powerful. So this is one of the key numerical examples. And then I saw this today. I saw it from from one of the panelists from IDC that we were talking about eGovernment will become Gov 2.0, and this is basically a definition from the World eGovernment Association, which was founded 2 years ago with 40 member countries in Korea, but they're very active. And this is where we were basically 3 or 7 years ago. Gov 1.0, it was basically putting government services online. One-way service, one-stop shop. I go, pay my taxes or something else. And it was very rigid, had very big limitations, and that was it. There was no interaction, no feedback, nothing. So it was basically government to you. And then we go to the world we have now, which is more interactive, right? More citizen-centric. It's the voice of the citizen. Just go to data.gov, whitehouse.gov, a lot of in the UK, in Australia. It's all about what the citizen is feeling, what he's thinking. Of course, there are some examples that are a little bit extreme, where a citizen, instead of providing comment, says he saw Elvis Presley last night. That's not very constructive, but that's some of the externalities that you see. But it's basically having this public-private collaboration and the crowdsourcing. And it's basically going from government to you to government with you. And that's, I think, we're at the stage we are right now. And then this is the third stage. I think there is still people that don't exactly agree with this, but this is a little bit of the thoughts that are going into it. It's more customized to individuals and more mobile. But I would rather right now stick to this one. But just wanted to show what the worldwide thinking is from eGovernment to Gov 2.0. And then I'm trying to narrow it down. So the pillars that we see globally is these three ones, right? Transparency, collaboration, and participation. And these are some of the examples, right? So, I mean, transparency is having that transparent vision around what the government is doing. And then the collaboration is a lot of the crowdsourcing, where citizens can give an idea. There are several platforms that are being built by different governments around the world, where they basically create a website, put a problem that they're facing, and then ask for feedback from citizens or groups, and say, give me your best idea. And they crowdsource it, and the best ideas float to the top because people start voting on them. And that's basically what we also heard in the panel. Imagine 41 million people in Brazil trying to fix one problem through crowdsourcing. I mean, you will of course have a lot of externalities or things that are not useful, but the core of it might be very useful. It would be a interesting experience to try. And you can only do that now with technology, to do it fast, interactive, and transparent. And then participation. When the new e-government directive by President Obama was written, it was not only about government putting their information online, but it was a law that said, you government, or the federal government, needs to ask feedback from citizens. This was the first time that was written in a law worldwide, where it says, you as a government have the obligation to tell your citizens to give me feedback around how can I improve, how can I put the most important data where in the internet for you to consume. It's about not only publishing all the data, but the quality of the data. So that was one of the key things. That way we can have joint service improvement and, of course, the civil engagement.